All right, everybody. Welcome to the morning webinar. If you're just joining us, we have only 56 participants right now. So let's make sure we are texting, calling, whatever we need to do to make sure we're letting our team members know that we have a very, very special guest for today. His name is Tom Robinson. And, I was recently introduced to Tom, and to give you a quick background about Tom, he had come out of a terrible solar sales job, and he did not like it. He was introduced to Renatus about 4 years ago, and actually, interestingly, he got introduced to Renatus by going to a Mark Kohler Saturday intensive, and during that event, he learned the profundity of his ignorance in terms of tax and legal. I'm sure any of us who've gone to Mark's intensive or any of his events or seen any of his classes, we know what that's like. So after joining Renatus, it's been 4 years since, he has now created his own interior design company with his wife, and they're working on their 30th project right now. They've won the Best of House awards for 2 years in a row. They have 22 rentals, 2 Airbnbs, and they recently bought a primary residence for $200,000 below the market value in a crazy market like Denver. One unique thing that Tom told me about himself is that he is an avid rock climber. So I just want to go ahead and pass over the mic to Mr. Tom Robinson. Tom, how are you doing today?
Avi, I'm doing great. I'm really glad to be here. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to the Renatus Nation and looking forward to sharing my story. And I have a particular piece of training I want to finish with that my intention is will help people close deals that have been on the fence within the next 24 hours. Now let me check. Can you hear me?
Yes, we're able to hear you loud and clear.
Okay, great. And can you give me screen control?
So you should have screen control right now. So while Tom is doing that, I just wanted to put in a quick plug in there. Tom is actually somebody who is extremely committed to the Renatus process. So when we talk about that, he actually comes into Denver week after week, learns and sharpens his skills in terms of sales persuasion, as well as learning how to build a team. Then he goes back every single week back to St. Louis, where he's building a team out there. And man, that is just incredible that he's able to do that every single week. Fly into Denver, then fly back to St. Louis week after week. So I just think that's absolutely incredible. And he's
all right. Can you see? I get it? All right, great. All right, good. You guys should see 2 brick houses side by side. Can somebody come off mute and tell me that is working?
It's working.
Excellent. All right, so I have 2 primary intentions for today. The first one is to give you stories to share with people who are relators. So if you're working through the drive system with Woody, you know that we take in information in different ways. So my buddy Noah called me and talked to me about Renatus for 4 or 5 months. And he was excited about the money, 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 about the lifestyle, about the freedom, about the money. And I didn't care. And finally, out of desperation, he got me on the phone with Bob Tierney, who talked to me about the community, about the relationships, about the people, about the difference we can make. And all of a sudden I went from, oh, this is one of those dumb multi-level marketing things, to this is exactly what I didn't know that I wanted. So Abby, thank you for the introduction. I actually loved my solar job. The problem was I started in St. Louis, where I'm from, and the solar incentive program ran out of money. So we couldn't sell solar anymore, including a number of projects that I had already sold. So I had commissions that I was expecting that I didn't get. Now, some of you may recognize there's some of us who have money coming in, and we know it's coming in, and there's room on the credit card so we can go buy the stuff that we're going to pay for with the money that's coming in later. And then when that money doesn't come in, it's a problem. So I had been selling solar. It was no longer there. My wife and I were in St. Louis. The company said, hey, if you want to go to Chicago, there's a new program. You can work there. So we moved to Chicago. I started doing solar sales in Chicago, and that program ran out of money earlier than anticipated, and projects that I had sold didn't get completed. So the reason that it was a crappy job is because I didn't get paid for a lot of work that I did. And that was right at the time where I was like desperate, trying to figure out what was next. You know, my buddy had been telling me about this real estate thing, and that's when I went and saw Mark Kohler, had my mind blown. It was such a hard day of training. You know, I'm a serial entrepreneur, so I've started several of my own businesses. I started and ran a nonprofit. I expected that I knew that I had a good handle on taxes and how to set up businesses and how that all worked. And then it was kind of like getting kicked by a horse, discovering the degree to which I really, really, really didn't know my hat from a handbag. And so it was a hard day, but I walked out with a completely new view of the world, of what was possible. And man, I was in, and I was like, I told my buddy that I never was going to talk to anybody about Renatus. That was my deal with them. I will get my education, but never talk to me about talking to other people. And then I kept getting more and more and more value. So I'm from St. Louis. My wife and I have lived there. We've lived in Chicago. We've lived in Boston. 2 years ago now, we came to visit Denver. And it was -4 in Chicago, and it was in the 60s in Denver. And we fell in love. We moved here to Denver about a year and a half ago. And I actually traveled to St. Louis to help build the team there. And I want to share a bit about St. Louis and about where I came from to give you a bit of context for why I'm so passionate about what we provide for people. So there are two things. One is, this brick house is a picture of the house that I grew up in. My parents bought it in 1984 for $115,000. They sold it in 98 for $145,000. And what that means is that we lived there for 14 years, and the house appreciated less than 2% per year. And why that is that the house you can't see to the right is a crack house. We lived in a fringe neighborhood. So most of my neighbors, great. The house next door, terrible. There was a really rough house at the top of the block. There was a really rough house at the bottom of the block. And about 2.5 years after we moved out, a fix and flipper came and bought those 3 houses, fixed up those 3 houses, and sold those 3 houses. And I don't know what that fix and flipper made on those projects. What I do know is that they increased the value of every house on my block by $200,000. So by going in and doing a real estate investing transaction, they increased the net worth of each of my neighbors by $200,000, which means they increased the value of my block by $8 million. And I was like, that's profound. That's a big difference for people. You know, it's great that they made some money, but holy smokes, what they did for my neighborhood is just amazing. I grew up at 6141 McPherson Avenue. This is in St. Louis. Forest Park, it's beautiful. If you haven't been, go. Spring or fall, those are great times. There's a main road right above where I grew up called Delmar. So one of the things that I learned, I became a realtor in 2005. And one of the things that I learned is that Del Mar is a really hard socioeconomic, politically, financial, it's a hard line. So in this square, south of Del Mar is my school where I went to grade school. North of Del Mar is my dad's church, where he's been a minister for probably 30 years now. And I became a realtor and learned how to run comps. And I was looking at this neighborhood and just kind of playing with, what are things worth? How does this work? And what I discovered was that if you wanted to buy a house directly south of Del Mar, you were looking at $500,000. And these are brick houses, just like the ones that I opened with. So beautiful brick houses, 3,000-ish square feet. One block south of Del Mar, $500,000. One block north of Del Mar, $50,000. And I got to thinking, I was like, well, that's a great opportunity. It's just a block away. So what if we go in and start cleaning up these buildings, and, we could make some money, we could do good for the neighborhood. And a buddy of mine and I actually put together a whole neighborhood redevelopment plan and spent months working on that. And what we got to at the end of that was what it would take to do what we saw possible in this neighborhood is a group of like-minded, savvy, ethical, moral, integrous real estate investors working together so that we could take, a block at a time and rehab vacant buildings and clean it up one block at a time. The problem with that is, as a realtor, I'd worked with over a dozen real estate investors, and they were jerks. Like, nobody played together. Everyone kept their cards really close to their vest. Like, if you know what deal I'm doing, then, you'll steal my deal. So I got really despondent. And I was like, well, someone will figure it out. And just to make it clear, one of these houses sold in the last 12 months for $640,000. The other one sold for $150,000. And if you're on the phone and you can't see the pictures, don't worry about it. They're beautiful brick houses, and you couldn't guess which is which. Or you can guess. And I'm happy to tell you. All right, the house on the left is the house that sold for $150,000. The house on the right sold for $640,000. Sorry, quick side note. So this is the first house that I bought. This was my first real estate investment. And I say real estate investment in air quotes because this was 2006. I didn't know what I was doing. I wasn't making any money, but a bank was willing to give me a $50,000 loan on a $40,000 house. If you are looking at the picture, it's not the cute little brick house. It's the yellow cinder block bungalow behind the tree. That was my first rental. I gave it back to Wells Fargo in 2009. Strong start to my real estate investing career. So I'd found a neighborhood that I wanted to transform. I got a rental. I lost the rental. I discovered that real estate investors are jerks. I got, beat up and despondent. And then my buddy's calling me talking about how much money we can make in real estate. And I went, no. Then he got me on the phone with Bob Tierney, and I went, oh, there's a community. Oh, we've got relationships. Oh, this is a group of people that really care about each other. I didn't know that there was such a thing in the investing world. And part of why I'm pounding this point is that some of you are talking to people in your circles. You're talking to people about all the money that can be made in real estate investing, all the money that can be made in the marketing side of this business. And if they respond well to that, then share Michael's story and Mitch's story and do that. If they're not responding, then they don't care. So it's important to listen for what are people's drives. Am I talking to a director, an executive, a relator? If you're talking to a relator, talk to them about the community. Talk to them about the contribution, the difference that we make, the way that we care about each other, the way that we're committed to each other's success. If you're like me and you're talking to people about our community and our relationships and our commitment to making a difference for each other, and the person you're talking to isn't responding, then stop talking about community and share Michael's penthouse and Mitch's car and try something else. So I got connected with the Renatus community in Chicago and went to started going to the study groups, and I was in a study group with 86 other people. It was a 6-month fix and flip study group, and we broke into smaller groups, and we went out and looking for, finding funding, evaluating, doing deals together. And I just got really clear, if I could take this group to St. Louis, we could do some real good in my hometown. And so I invited 86 people in Chicago to move to St. Louis, and 0 said yes. So that was the moment when I got really clear, if I want to fulfill on my commitment in St. Louis, I'm going to need to go to St. Louis and build a group. And I'd met Michael, at nationals. I think we went and shot guns together. But we hadn't built a relationship, but I'd heard that he was traveling back and forth from Salt Lake to build a community in Denver, and went, well, if he can do it, I can do it. So here's a pro tip for anyone who's looking at starting a new market. Go to every introduction and follow-up you possibly can for months. Get yourself into a position where you can get up and lead. So otherwise you'll spin your wheels traveling to the place that you want to open a market with no experience doing that. That's just a side note, because I did that the hard way. But now, so for the last 10 months, I've been in St. Louis pretty much every week, leading an intro or a follow-up or a Super Saturday. Our group there is growing. If you have people in St. Louis, send them our way. We take good care of people. So the little yellow bungalow was my first real estate, we'll call it real estate gamble. And this beautiful home is our now primary residence. And really I share this because for me, it's a great piece of evidence for the development that my wife and I have experienced working with Renatus for the last 4 years. It's really easy to see other people grow and develop. It's hard to see it in yourself. But we moved here. The market was crazy. My sister and brother-in-law spent $32,000 over asking to get into a little house that, where I'm from in St. Louis, would have been they paid $432,000 for what looked to me like a $100,000 house. So we got here, we rented, started looking for an off-market deal. We found this. We negotiated to buy this house for, frankly, the people we bought it from could have listed it and sold it in a day for $850,000. We negotiated it for $640,000, so over $200,000 below market at that time. We've cleaned it up and added some equity, but you can see the front of the house. This is a house that Babe built. Babe was a top athlete in the 20th century, female athlete. She actually created the LPGA. She was given the money to create the ladies PGA after winning 86 consecutive men's tournaments. They wanted to get rid of her. Anyway, she built this house. You can see the house up top if you're online. In the back, you can see my office. My office has 2 hammocks, a water feature, a fire pit. Also in back, there's a cottage. It was the carriage house, which was converted into an apartment. The people before us built a 3-car garage with an apartment upstairs, and we have a separate entrance, mother-in-law suite. So our rentals on our property actually cover the cost of our house, which is gangster. It's pretty great. And quite a contrast to, a number of years ago. So if you have any questions went through that pretty quickly. If you have any questions about my motivation, if there are any details of my story that would be useful for you to flesh out, if you've got a relator who would benefit from a more full conversation about the benefits of our community, of our relationships, of our commitment to each other, to making a difference, to supporting each other, if that would be useful, then I'd be happy to set up a 3-way call with you. Now, for the meat, here's the meat. This is a training that I put together designed to help you immediately elevate your communication skills. The first aspect of this is mostly when we think about communication skills, when we think about working on our communication skills, where we go to work is on our speaking. Michael, can I get a script? I need a script. I need to practice a script. I need to practice what I say. What do I say in this situation? What do I say in this situation? Well, if they say that, what do I say? What do I say? What do I say? What do I say? Primarily in communication, in improving our communication, we focus on speaking. So what I want you to consider for the next few minutes is that the heart, the most important component of communication isn't speaking, but listening. And there are different levels of listening. So listening, we start with hearing. Hearing is a biological process. Hearing is sound waves hit your ocular nerve, which fire off electrical impulses to the auditory part of your brain, which deciphers the sounds. And if they're sounds made by other human beings, typically they get deciphered into words. Sometimes it's screaming, but usually words. Now, hearing is normal. So you may be having a conversation with someone and they say, "You're not listening to me." Or you may be talking to someone and have the experience that they're not listening to you. You say, "You're not listening to me." And they go, "Oh, I hear you." Or you say, No, I heard you." Hearing is normal. Now, if we elevate hearing one level, we get active hearing. Active hearing adds a cognitive trick, a cognitive component. Active hearing is irritating. So you can think, there have been situations where you've been talking to somebody and you have the experience that they're not listening. You go, "You're not listening." And they go, "I heard you. You said XYZ. So active hearing is hearing with the ability to regurgitate back to someone what they said. This is really, really, really common, I've found, in marriages. "Honey, you're not listening." "Yes, I am. You said blah, blah, blah." "Why don't I feel like you were listening? I don't have the experience that you were listening." And you regurgitating that back doesn't prove anything, you jerk. So the next level is listening. And listening goes beyond hearing. Listening requires intention. It requires attention. It requires really being interested in what the other person is saying. Now, we have a barrier to listening. It's actually, I think, the biggest barrier to being effective in communication. I'm going to pause and distinguish that barrier. You guys want to know what the barrier is? Let's see all your mute buttons waving. Yes. All right, good. So consider that the biggest barrier to communication, and to listening particularly, but to communication, is the little voice in your head. Do you know what I'm talking about? Do you guys all know that you have a little voice in your head? In case you don't know what I'm talking about, I'm going to be quiet for a minute so you can hear the little voice in your head. You hear it? For some of you, the little voice just said, "What little voice? I don't have a little voice. I don't talk to myself." Is he saying I talk to myself? I'm not crazy. He might be crazy. That little voice, that's the little voice that gets in the way of listening. Because what we typically do, rather than listening to what someone is saying, is we listen to what the little voice in our head is saying about what the person is saying, which colors every conversation with our own judgments, assessments, biases, and it's actually a barrier to listening. It's a barrier to communication. So listening requires being intentional. It requires being interested. It requires setting aside your little voice and actually listening to what the person you're talking to is saying. And listening is rare. If you're really listening to someone, you're really getting what they're saying. They have the experience that you get their communication, that you get what they're trying to communicate, that you're really there with them. It's an extraordinary experience. People will buy from you just because you're the first person that's actually listened to them in days or weeks or months. If you have a W-2 job, you can think, when's the last time that you had the experience of someone really listening? rather than just, yeah, get back to work. Or why didn't you do this? Or I need you to do that. Or, right? So listening leaves other people with an extraordinary experience. And taking that to the next level is active listening. Active listening goes beyond listening to what people are saying. It goes beyond being interested in what they're trying to communicate. Active listening has you listen not only to what the person is saying, but where are they communicating from? It gives you access to being in someone else's world and really getting the whole, getting the breadth and the depth and the detail and the context and the world of their communication. And when you actively listen, when you really get someone's communication, when you get the world that they're communicating from, they have an experience of being known. Active listening is seductive. If you're single, you'll want to practice active listening on dates with people you're interested in. Active listening is seductive because people have the experience of being known in a way that is so rare. So what I invite you to do is, over the next, you can take 15 minutes, you can take an hour, you can do this in bits and pieces over the next couple of days, but start looking at conversations, look at relationships where you're not being effective, where you're not producing the results that you want, that you're committed to, where you're not making the difference that you're committed to, where you're having the same conversation over and over again. If you're having the same conversation over and over again, you're not listening. I know it's really easy to say, well, they're not listening. If they listened, but it doesn't work like that. Unfortunately, you can't make anyone else listen. But what you can do is you can bring listening to those conversations. You can bring listening to those relationships, which begins with being honest about not having been listening. You may have heard everything that your wife said, but were you listening? Did she have the experience of you really getting what she's communicating? So there's an access to active listening. There's an access to listening. So listening requires setting aside the voice in your head. And one way to do that is by listening from a question. You can call it just listen for the gold. Where's the gold in this, in what this person is sharing? Where's the gold? What's the juice in this conversation? This is really, really fun to practice with people that you've had the same conversation over and over and over and over and over and over again. This is really fun to practice with people where you already know what they're going to say. Because if you have someone in your life that always says the same thing, or you always have the same conversation, or it always goes the same way, you can completely destroy that cycle by listening for the gold, by coming to the next conversation, listening for what's new, what's possible, listening for what's amazing about this person. This is tricky with family, with people that you've known for a long time. It takes something, but this is a muscle that when you exercise it like any other muscle, it grows. This is in my experience, practicing listening is the biggest bang for the buck in impacting and improving your communication. So listening from the question, what's the contribution here? Listening from what's brilliant about what's being said. What's brand new about this? What's surprising and delightful about this? If you've done what I've heard William Lamb recommend, if you've created your ideal customer avatar and you know the characteristics that you're looking for and the kind of people that you want to work with, you can be listening for where are those present? Where's the enthusiasm? Where's the capacity? Where is this, how is this person a contribution? How is this conversation a contribution? But an easy one is what's amazing about this? If you're coming from the question, what's amazing about this? If you're asking what's amazing about this, what are you going to find? What's amazing about this? And when you find what's amazing about this, it will lead to more questions, and it will have you asking questions. It'll have you getting more and more into the person you're talking to's world. And that's seductive. If you really bring active listening, if you can set aside your concerns for yourself, if you can set aside, you'll never shut up the little voice. But if you can set it aside for a couple minutes, you can set aside your concern for, am I going to make a check off this person? That's one of my biggest pitfalls, especially if I'm feeling hungry and I'm talking to somebody. If I'm feeling like my bank account's getting a little bit low and I'm talking to somebody, one of my pitfalls is talking to myself about, well, if they get the essentials, I'll make 1,000, but if I can get them to the advanced, blah, 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 blah. And the little voice is off and running, and I may be able to regurgitate what they said, but they're not having the experience of being heard and known. I mean, set all of that aside and come from a question. Practice what's amazing about this. Then the people that you're having conversations with will start to notice something about you. And if they've known you for a while, they'll be surprised. If they've just met you, there's nothing to be surprised about, but they'll start to notice that you're uncommonly good looking and really, really bright, really smart. And they'll start to notice that you're super interesting. And if you're single on your next date, don't provide any information, just ask questions. Come from what's amazing about this person and ask them questions, ask them questions, ask them questions, ask them questions, ask them questions. They'll talk and talk and talk and talk and talk. And by the end of the date, you will be the most interesting person they've met, having not said anything. This is the closest thing I've found to magic. So, look in your life. Where have you been hearing but not listening? What relationships have been stagnant, or have you not been fulfilling on what you're committed to, or have you not been able to make the difference that you want to make? Take the case that in those relationships you've been hearing but not listening, and start bringing listening to those conversations. Start getting really interested in what's happening over there. Practice setting aside your own judgments, your own concerns, and getting the other person's world. And I promise you, you will be surprised and delighted. And you will elevate your effectiveness, making a difference for people and having them get the value of what we do and opening doors and windows to people's minds. All right, Abby, that's what I have for that training. Do we have time for questions? Does anyone have questions? Do I need to do anything to turn this back over to you?
No, I mean, really, it's if anyone does have any questions for you, they're welcome to come off mute and ask those. But it's all you, Tom.
Excellent.
Good morning. Any books that you recommend that you probably read in reference to the subject?
That is a great question. Do you have access to the Elevate Audible series?
Yes,
Audible?
I do, sir.
Oh, there's so many good ones. One thing, this may seem a little off topic. One thing for the men who are listening, if you haven't listened to The Way of the Superior Man by David Deida, I recommend that. Women, if you're in a partnership with a man or you want to be, I also recommend reading this book. But it's subtle, but he really does a good job of creating a context to listen from more powerfully.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And then really anything, I feel like I walk away from every encounter with Jim Rohn being more connected to people. So that as well. Thanks for the question.
You're
Who
welcome.
else? Any other questions?
No question. I just want to say I appreciate you and thank you.
Thank you. All right, Avi, let's do this. Let's it's quarter till. Let's have the next 15 minutes of this call be people on their own looking at relationships, jot down some names, figure out 3 people you're going to talk to in the next 3 people that you're going to talk to today. You're going to specifically bring listening to. You're going to listen from what's amazing about this person, their story, their situation, what's the contribution here, what's brilliant about what's being said. Take this training, put it into action, and then I'd love to hear what breakthroughs that you have, especially new conversations in relationships that were getting stale. Sound good?
Sounds good. Tom, and just so you know, there are, if you look at, were you able to see the chats that came up?
No.
There have been a few questions in there.
I did not. I love technology. I love learning.
So one of the questions was, what are some questions you find yourself using repeatedly? That was asked by Jeffner.
Excellent. I think the questions that I ask the most are, can you say more about that? Or can you say that differently? People have a tendency to run tapes. They've got things that they say over and over again. So frequently the first answer to a question that I ask will be some sort of boilerplate that doesn't really communicate. And asking, can you say more about that? Can you tell me more about that? Or can you say that differently? Actually has people stop and think and communicate more clearly, which makes it easier to get what they're really trying to communicate and to get where they're coming from. And yes, Avery, How to Win Friends and Influence People is a great book. Thanks, Scott. All right, anything else? If not, go get to work.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much, Tom. Really enjoyed having you here. And, really, usually the speaker is the one who typically ends the presentation. So you're welcome to do that whenever you'd like.
All right. Love you guys. Have today make a difference. And we will see you tomorrow.